The wood-paneled conference room grew quiet as Reich Marshal Hermann Göring gave his opinion to German aircraft makers. His words, written down by secretaries, would become one of history's most terrible mistakes in judgment. The Americans cannot build airplanes. They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades. Through the high windows of the Air Ministry, the gathered businessmen could see smoke going up from Berlin's factories, working hard to replace the German Air Force's losses. The Third Reich, while starting to stumble from losses at Stalingrad and in North Africa, still had power over most of Europe. In Göring's view, formed by old ideas from the 1920s, the United States was still a country of jazz players and shopkeepers, able to make household items but not weapons of war. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from, and if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. What Göring was unaware of was that at that same time, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships every day. By the time his meeting was over, the Richmond shipyards by themselves would have finished another ship. In 6 months, those Americans who supposedly couldn't build planes would be sending raids of 1,000 bombers over Germany, while their shipyards put out a new cargo ship every 8 hours. The numbers of German defeat were being written not in war plans, but in factory reports that would soon show the deadly, false belief at the center of Nazi thinking. Hermann Göring's low opinion of American factory strength didn't start in 1943. It had long been a part of German military thought. As a World War I flying hero who shot down 22 Allied planes, Göring had seen America's late and small role in that fight. The United States had joined World War I with almost no air force and had to use French and British planes. This memory colored his deadly guess about American abilities. The specific remark about airplanes became Göring's usual answer when asked about America's potential threat. He said similar things all through the early war years. In 1940, after France was defeated, he promised Hitler, "The Americans are good at making stylish cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they are any good at making airplanes. They are bluffing. They are great at bluffing." This was not just Göring's private false belief. German intelligence regularly underestimated American potential. In November 1941, General Joseph Schmid, head of German Air Force intelligence, sent a report saying that American plane production could not be more than 400 planes a month. His study decided that American factories did not have the precise tools and trained workers needed for military work. German naval intelligence was just as dismissive. In January 1942, a naval captain reported to Admiral Raeder that American shipbuilding ability was limited to maybe 1 cargo ship per week at each shipyard. "Their workers are soft," he wrote, "used to high pay and short hours. They don't have the discipline of German workers." Even Hitler, while seeming unconcerned in public, secretly understood the risk, as he told his generals in December 1941. "We must defeat Russia quickly. Once that is done, we can deal with America before their production becomes too great." But Göring, in charge of judging enemy air strength, stayed sure of American industrial weakness. Even as Göring kept repeating his low opinion, America was changing into what Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, in his State of the Union speech, Roosevelt laid out amazing production goals. First, to increase our production rate of airplanes so rapidly that in this year, 1942, we shall produce 60,000 planes. The rate of increase will be maintained and continued so that next year, 1943, we shall produce 125,000 airplanes, including 100,000 combat planes. German intelligence picked up these numbers. In his diary, propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels wrote on January 8, 1942, "The Führer laughed when I showed him Roosevelt's production targets. Pure propaganda. If they could build 1/10 of these numbers, it would be a miracle." What the Germans failed to realize was that America had been getting ready since 1940. The groundwork had been laid not with military contracts, but with British money. The British Purchasing Commission, desperate for ships to replace those sunk by U-boats, had come to American businessman Henry J. Kaiser with a bold idea: build 60 cargo ships using mass production methods never before used in shipbuilding. Kaiser, who had never built a ship but had finished the Hoover Dam early, took the challenge. His methods would change not just shipbuilding, but the whole idea of wartime making. Instead of skilled shipbuilders carefully making each vessel one by one, Kaiser would use pre-made parts, welding instead of riveting, and assembly line methods taken from car making. The Liberty ship model was intentionally basic, a 441-foot cargo vessel based on an old British design, powered by a steam engine that any mechanic could fix. When German intelligence got the technical details from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they called it crude. A German captain wrote, "These ships are coffins, slow, clumsy, with the sailing ability of a brick." What the captain didn't get was that the Liberty ship's simplicity was its brilliance. Every part was the same. Every section was made beforehand in factories all over America and sent to 18 shipyards, where they were put together like giant 3D puzzles. The learning happened fast. Workers who had never seen a ship were making more than experienced German shipbuilders in just a few months. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of building. German naval intelligence noted this with contentment. At that speed, Americans could build maybe 50 ships a year. What they didn't see was the speed up. The second ship took 180 days. The 10th took 105 days. By January 1942, building time had dropped to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made a statement that German intelligence called pure propaganda. He would build a ship in 10 days. In September 1942, at the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland, as German U-boats had their second happy time, sinking 609,000 tons of Allied shipping that month, Kaiser's workers laid the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal at 12:01 a.m. on September 13th. What happened next was a perfectly planned industrial performance. 3 shifts of workers toiled non-stop. Pre-made sections, some weighing 250 tons, were hoisted into place by huge cranes. Welders, many of them women who had never held a torch 6 months before, laid down miles of perfect seams. The workers included homemakers, farmers, and store clerks who had been turned into shipbuilders in weeks. Among them was Wendy the welder, whose real name was Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became one of the fastest welders in the yard. Working with her was Tom Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama who had become a master shipfitter, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose welding speed was better than German standards. On September 23rd at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River exactly 10 days after her keel was laid. In Berlin, German intelligence brushed off the reports. Admiral Karl Donitz told his officers, "Even if true, this is a stunt. They cannot keep up such production." But Kaiser was not done. He declared, "We can do it faster." On November 8, 1942, at 12:01 a.m. in Richmond Shipyard, No. 2, California, as German armies fell back from El Alamein, American shipyard workers started a feat that would crush the last bits of German self-assurance. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was put down as hundreds of pre-made parts waited in perfect order around the slipway. The whole ship had been constructed before it was constructed, every piece made, fitted, and checked in workshops around the yard. Now they would put it together in a massive speed-building show. Kaiser had chosen his best workers for this ultimate effort. The group included Catherine Glasscock, a former schoolteacher who had become one of the quickest welders in the yard, laying seams at 35 feet per hour, a speed German welders seldom reached. Richmond Jones, an African-American former sharecropper, managed the main crane with a skill that allowed him to place 250-ton sections within an inch of their marks. Mary Pilosino, a 19-year-old Italian-American, led the electrical installation, crew that would wire 5 miles of cable in under 20 hours. Hour after hour, the ship grew at an unbelievable pace. The bottom hull plates were welded on in 6 hours. The side plates were up in 18 hours. By the end of the first day, you could see the shape of a ship, the pre-made deckhouse, with plumbing, and wiring already in place, was lowered on day 2, a single lift that would have taken German shipyards a week. The engine, a 2,500 horsepower steam monster weighing 140 tons, was put in on day 3. It had been built in Toledo, tested, partly taken apart for shipping, and came with engineers who could install it in hours instead of weeks. On November 12th, at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was launched, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. She weighed 14,245 tons and would need just a little more work before going into service. The impossible had become normal. The first reliable news reached Berlin in December 1942. German Air Force reconnaissance flights using long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors brought back pictures that German intelligence at first would not believe. The photos showed dozens of Liberty ships being built at single shipyards. A German captain counted over 200 ships under construction in the aerial photos. His report, sent on December 15, 1942, warned, "If these sightings are correct, American shipbuilding ability is 10 times more than our estimates." The report was hidden. Göring would not admit his judgment had been wrong. "The pictures are misleading," he told his officers. "The Americans are showing us the same ships from different angles to give the idea of mass production." But U-boat commanders were reporting worrying changes. A German captain noted in January 1943, "Convoy HX-222 had 47 merchant ships, all looking brand new, standard models obviously mass-produced. Where are these ships from?" The answer was everywhere. 18 American shipyards were now building Liberty ships. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore had 47,000 workers and was launching a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation was finishing one every 5 days. Workers who had never seen the sea were building ships faster than experienced German craftsmen. By March 1943, American shipyards were completing Liberty ships at a speed that was beyond German understanding. 3 ships were launched each day. Admiral Donitz's staff figured that U-boats would need to sink 1.3 million tons a month just to keep up. The best month for U-boats was November 1942, when they sank 729,000 tons. They were already behind. Each Liberty ship needed 250,000 different parts. The hull itself needed 30,000 separate steel pieces cut to exact sizes. The electrical system used 25 miles of wiring. The ship had 3,500 feet of piping, 2,500 valves, and 350 miles of welding. Yet American workers were putting these complex machines together in an average of 42 days by mid-1943. The workers themselves went against Nazi race ideas. Of the 650,000 Americans making ships, 200,000 were women, Rosie the Riveters, who showed that gender had nothing to do with factory skill. African Americans, who Nazi ideas called inferior, were running cranes and laying welds that were better than German standards. At Kaiser's Richmond yards alone, mixed-race work crews, impossible under Nazi race laws, were making a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity was amazing. Chinese-American welders worked next to Norwegian immigrants, Native American. Riveters from New Mexico worked with Jewish refugees from Germany. Mexican-American women led crews that included poor white people from Appalachia. This group of supposedly lesser people was making more than the German master race by amounts that were impossible to figure. In May 1943, at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Admiral Dönitz stood before Hitler with terrible news. In what came to be known as Black May, the U-boats had lost 41 submarines while sinking only 50 merchant ships. American shipyards were building ships 3 times faster than U-boats could sink them. "My Führer," Dönitz reported, "the Americans launched 140 merchant ships last month. We sank 41. At this speed, they will have replaced every ship lost since 1939 by the end of the year." Hitler looked at Göring, whose large body seemed to get smaller under his gaze. "You promised me the Americans could only build consumer goods," Hitler said softly, his voice full of the threat that came before his angry outbursts. Göring tried to change the subject. "The ships are of poor quality, my Führer. They will fall apart in storms. Our intelligence says—" "Your intelligence," Hitler cut in, "is worthless. The Americans are making more than us in every area." The numbers were clear. American factories were making 8,000 planes a month. German production, even with Albert Speer's efforts, was at 2,000. American tank production was over 2,000 a month. Germany made 500. The Liberty ships were just the noticeable sign of an industrial power Germany could never equal. On October 4, 1943, Göring made the speech quoted at the start of this story, still holding on to denial even as proof grew. He told airplane makers, "The Americans claim amazing production numbers. They say 8,000 airplanes a month. This is, of course, impossible. Even if true, the quality must be poor. Quantity without quality is pointless." But even as he talked, Göring knew the truth. German Air Force pilots said that American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were better than German fighters. B-17s and B-24s were showing up over Germany in formations of 1,000 planes. The poor quality American planes were systematically destroying German cities. General of Fighters Adolf Galland confronted Göring after the speech. "Reich Marshal, I have seen captured American production numbers. They are building 54-engine bombers a week. That's more than all our fighters combined. Your dismissal of their abilities has doomed the Reich." Göring went back to Carenhall, his hunting estate, where he comforted himself with the art he had stolen from European museums. The most believable witnesses to American industrial power were the U-boat crews who faced it directly. A German captain of U-977 wrote, "By late 1943, the convoys were huge, 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most of them new American builds. We would sink one or two if we were lucky, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. For every ship we sank, 3 new ones showed up on the horizon." The commander of U-415 gave what might be the most moving testimony. "We could see the Liberty ships through our periscopes, painted in fresh gray, their hulls showing the signs of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets, standard deck gear, identical shapes. They came in never-ending lines, each convoy bigger than the last. We started to realize we were fighting not just ships, but a whole industrial system that could replace losses faster than we could cause them." The mental effect was crushing. American broadcasts announced ship launchings like sports results. German submarine crews stopped keeping count because the numbers were making them lose hope. By January 1944, American production numbers were being broadcast as a mental weapon. German intelligence could only listen as the numbers were read out. Ships finished in 1943. Phase 238 Liberty ships, 203 Victory ships, better versions, 122 tankers, 367 military vessels. Monthly production highs, December 1943, 155 merchant ships. Launched 8,789 airplanes delivered, 2,464 tanks finished, 153,000 military trucks made. Wilhelm Zangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, informed Hitler in February 1944, "The Americans are making annually 100,000 aircraft to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, and 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. These ratios are not manageable for even one more year." Hitler supposedly threw the report in the fire, yelling, "Defeatist propaganda." But the numbers were low. Real American production in 1944 would be even higher than these guesses. Separate proof came from Germany's Japanese allies. Commander Toshikazu Oi, an assistant naval representative in Berlin, sent a coded message to Tokyo in March 1944. "German leaders keep underestimating American production ability. I have confirmed Americans launched 173 ships in February alone. German officials refuse to believe it. Their false belief puts strategic planning at risk. I recommend the Imperial Navy assume American production is double German estimates." The Japanese, facing American power in the Pacific, had no false hopes. Admiral Yamamoto had warned before Pearl Harbor, I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no hope of success. He understood what Göring never did. That American industrial power, once started, was basically endless from an enemy's point of view. June 6, 1944, D-Day, was the ultimate show of American industrial power. German defenders saw a fleet that was beyond belief. 6,939 ships, including hundreds of Liberty ships full of supplies, vehicles, and ammunition. A German general in charge of the 716th Infantry Division reported, "The sea is black with ships. They go on to the horizon in all directions. This is not an invasion. It is a migration." Every Liberty ship in that huge fleet stood for 42 days of American factory work. Every tank landing was one of 88,410 America would make during the war. Every Jeep was one of 639,145 that would come off assembly lines. The landing craft themselves, thousands of them, had been made in places like Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, by workers who had never seen the ocean. An officer defending Sword Beach later wrote, "We had been told Americans were soft, that their soldiers would break under strain, that their gear was inferior. But I watched their engineers build a floating harbor in 5 days that was bigger than most German ports. Their trucks climbed our beach obstacles like mountain goats. Their supposedly poor fighters cleared the German Air Force from the skies." Even as American bombs fell on Berlin in February 1945, Göring held on to his fantasy. He told his staff, "The American production numbers are inflated. Many ships are probably wooden fakes for propaganda." His second-in-command, a general, recorded, "The Reich Marshal lives in a fantasy. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Luna. He still says they can't have built so many planes. When I showed him crashed bomber serial numbers proving at least 15,000 B-17s and B-24s have been built, he called me a defeatist." The truth was worse. America had made 31,104 four-engine bombers by the war's end, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This one type of airplane was more than Germany's entire airplane production for the war. When Americans took over the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they found Göring's intelligence files. Report after report warning of American strength had been marked unreliable or enemy propaganda in Göring's writing. One report from June 1943 said, "American shipyard in Panama, seen from neutral waters, counted 17 Liberty ships being built at the same time. Estimated completion rate, 1 every 3 days." Göring had written, "Impossible. Agent compromised or insane." Another from December 1943 announced the completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Göring's note, propaganda. Real number probably less than 200. An American major looking at the papers later wrote, "It was shocking to see how completely the German leadership had fooled themselves. They had correct information but refused to believe it because it went against their racial ideas and pre-war beliefs." At Nuremberg in 1946, Göring was faced with production numbers: 2,010 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296 South-429 airplanes, 88 410 tanks, 2,383 311 military trucks. Göring answered, "These numbers show quantity, not quality. We Germans put quality over quantity." Prosecutor Robert Jackson then showed a captured German report from 1944, written by Göring's own officers, admitting American planes were better in every way: speed, range, weapons, and reliability. Göring became quiet. In talks with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilber, Göring finally admitted, "I misjudged the Americans. I thought they were soft, spoiled by luxury. When I said they could only make consumer goods, I believed it. It was the biggest mistake of my life. They buried us under a mountain of production." German dismissal of American ability had deadly results. Admiral Dönitz continued the U-boat war after it was mathematically impossible to win. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 died, a 70% death rate, the highest of any service in any country during the war. These men died trying to sink ships that were being replaced faster than they could be destroyed. The German Air Force, believing Göring's promises about limited American airplane production, kept up offensive missions long after they should have switched to just defense. The result: 433,000 German Air Force members killed trying to fight an enemy, making 50 planes for every German plane. The U-boats themselves tell the tale. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war. They sank almost 3,000 Allied ships, 175 warships, and 2,125 merchant ships. But the Allies built 5,177 merchant vessels. For every ship sunk, 2 were built. Numbers don't lie, even when leaders do. Behind the Liberty ships were 18 million Americans working in war production, more workers than in Germany's entire military. The Richmond shipyards alone had 93,000 workers at their peak, more than Germany's whole shipbuilding industry. These workers came from all over, shattering Nazi ideas about racial and social order. Emma Martinez, a Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston Shipbuilding, finished 300 feet of perfect welding per shift, a speed German welders rarely met. Dorothy Luck, a homemaker from Oakland, became a crane operator handling 250-ton lifts. Thomas Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama, became a ship fitter whose skill was better than German standards. They worked in conditions impossible under Nazism, mixed-race cafeterias despite local segregation rules, daycare centers for working mothers, medical clinics with free health care. Workers made $1.20 an hour, more than skilled German workers made in a day. They bought war bonds with extra money while German workers faced death for slowing down. The difference was clear. American workers willingly worked overtime for extra pay and pride. German factories relied more and more on slave labor, workers from captured lands who actively damaged production when they could. While American workers' children went to school, German teenagers were drafted into anti-aircraft crews. While American workers suggested ideas that sped up production, German workers who pointed out problems risked being shot for being defeatist. Liberty ships showed American creativity that Germany couldn't equal. Welding took the place of riveting, cutting building time by 30% and weight by 600 tons. The method, created by Lincoln Electric Company, was so advanced that captured German engineers said it was impossible without seeing it done. Pre-making parts reached levels Germany never did. Whole deck houses were built miles from shipyards, complete with plumbing, electrical systems, and furniture. They were moved by specially designed train cars and lifted by cranes that could handle 250 tons, 5 times the size of Germany's largest shipyard cranes. The production system itself was groundbreaking. Henry Kaiser started assembly line methods where workers focused on specific jobs. A welder might work on the same kind of joint for months, getting a speed and perfection impossible with old methods. The learning happened so fast that workers who had never seen a ship in July were making more than experienced German shipbuilders by December. Each Liberty ship needed materials from all over America, delivered with a precision German supply officers called impossible. Steel plate from Pittsburgh came exactly when needed. Engines from Toledo were delivered complete and tested. Electrical generators from Schenectady showed up right on schedule. The railroad system that supported this wonder moved amazing amounts. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone moved 50 million tons of war materials in 1943, more than Germany's entire rail system, even with slave labor. American railroads did this while still running civilian passenger trains. A German supply officer who studied American production after the war wrote, "We had trouble supplying single factories. The Americans supplied whole industries. We counted boxcars. They counted trainloads. We planned in weeks. They planned in years. Even as Liberty ships came out in a flood, Americans were making the design better. Victory ships, which came out in 1944, were faster, 15 to 17 knots versus 11, bigger and more advanced, yet built almost as fast, 42 days on average. The Victory ship program showed America's ability to innovate while keeping up mass production. New turbine engines replaced old systems. Better hull shapes increased speed and capacity. Improved ventilation kept cargo fresh. Enhanced navigation gear improved safety. All of this was done without slowing down production. In contrast, German attempts to improve submarines, the Type 21 program, led to chaos. Only 4 Type 21 U-boats were working before the war's end, while America built 531 Victory ships in 18 months. The money difference made Göring's dismissal a fantasy from the start. In 1941, American GDP was $126 billion. Germany's was $35 billion. American steel production was 80 million tons. Germany's was 20 million tons. America made 260 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. Germany made 80 billion. American production went up 170% during the war. German production went up only 30% despite Speer's desperate work. By 1944, America was spending 90 billion a year on the war, more than Germany's entire pre-war GDP. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, more than Germany's entire U-boat fleet cost. The head of German wartime statistics figured after the war, America made 6 times more raw materials, 8 times more finished goods, and had 12 times more transportation ability. We were not beaten. We were buried. American production became a weapon itself. The Office of War Information broadcast statistics to Germany. German soldiers heard America was building a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7 minutes. They didn't believe it until they saw it. A German soldier defending Normandy wrote, "The Americans announced 10,000 planes for Invasion Day. We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything they told us was propaganda turned out to be true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda." Each Liberty ship became a sign of American invincibility. German propaganda tried to make fun of them as ugly ducklings, but crews knew the truth. As one captured submariner told his questioners, "When convoys of 50, 60, 70 of these ships appeared, we knew the war was lost." Math doesn't lie, even when politicians do. After Germany's surrender, American investigators questioned German industrial leaders about their wartime judgments. Their answers all condemned Göring's decisions. Fritz Thyssen, the steel tycoon, who had helped Hitler come to power, said, "Göring lived in a fantasy. He visited America in the 1920s, saw only speakeasies and jazz clubs, never steel mills or auto plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war." Albert Speer was even harsher. Göring's dismissal of American production was criminal neglect. By the time I became armaments minister, it was too late. The Americans made in a month what took us a year. The Liberty ships were just the visible sign of an industrial power we could never match. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories had been the pride of German industry, admitted, "We made the best steel in the world, but in small amounts. The Americans made good steel in huge amounts. One Liberty ship had enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They built 2,710 Liberty ships. We built 1,347 Tiger tanks. The math is clear." Even the Soviet Union, America's ally but ideological opponent, was amazed by American industrial output. The Liberty ships became a lifeline not just for Britain, but for the Soviet war effort too. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs, "The Americans gave us 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what really amazed us were the Liberty ships themselves, delivering these supplies through Arctic waters under constant German attack. Each ship that reached Murmansk was a victory of American industry over German submarines. Without these ships, we could not have driven to Berlin." Nikita Khrushchev, who managed Ukrainian industrial production during the war, was typically direct. "Without American trucks, we couldn't have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we couldn't have built our tanks. Without American food, we couldn't have fed our army. The Liberty ships brought us everything from boots to telephone wire to Spam. Göring's dismissal of American industry was a gift to us. It meant Germany underestimated the force that was supplying both fronts against them." Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov added his view. "We lost many ships to German U-boats in the Arctic convoys. But for every ship sunk, the Americans built 3 more. The Germans could sink ships. The Americans could build oceans of them. The final numbers, the complete accounting, show Göring's terrible mistake." Liberty ships 2,710 built in 18 shipyards. Average build time, 42 days by 1943. Fastest, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Total tonnage, 29,292,000 tons. Cost, $1.8 million per ship on average. Total merchant ships, 5,177 vessels of all kinds, 56 million deadweight tons, more than all other nations put together. Shipyard workforce peak, 1.7 million workers with 600,000 women, 35%, and 250,000 African Americans, 14%. Average pay, 1.20 per hour. Production comparison USA versus Germany. Aircraft 296, 429 versus 111,767. Tanks 88, 410 versus 67,429. Trucks 2383, 311 versus 350,000. Artillery 257,390 versus 159 and 147. Machine guns 2,679 840 versus 100,000. Ammunition 41 billion rounds versus 8 billion rounds. U-boat war statistics: German U-boats built 1,062, destroyed 785. Allied ships sunk by U-boats, almost 3,000. Allied ships built, 5,777. Net gain, almost 3,000 ships. The Liberty ships changed more than warfare. They changed society itself. The mixed-race shipyards, though limited by local laws, set a pattern for post-war civil rights progress. Women proved their industrial skill for good, changing the American workforce forever. Kaiser's healthcare system for workers became Kaiser Permanente, now serving 12 million Americans. Production methods first used in the Liberty ship program changed global shipbuilding. Welding replaced riveting worldwide. Pre-making parts became standard. The assembly line idea influenced post-war Japanese and Korean shipbuilders who would later pass American production using methods Americans created. Most importantly, Liberty ships showed that democracy could mobilize better than totalitarianism, that free workers made more than slave labor, that diversity was a strength, not a weakness. They proved Roosevelt's idea of America as the arsenal of democracy right. At Nuremberg, waiting to be executed, Göring kept his noble manner, but could no longer deny the truth. In his last statement to the court, he didn't mention American production at all. The silence itself an admission. On October 15, 1946, 2 hours before his planned execution, Göring killed himself with a cyanide pill. He died finally seeing his false beliefs. Dr. Gustav Gilbert, the prison psychologist, recorded Göring's last confession about American industry. "I should have known. A nation that could build the Empire State Building in 4 and 10 days could build anything. But I believed our propaganda about American weakness. The Liberty ships should have been called victory ships from the start. They were our defeat made real. Today, 2 Liberty ships still sail, the SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. They are the last working reminders of history's greatest industrial feat. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on memorial trips, their whistles echo across waters where U-boats once hunted, reminding us of a time when democracy was threatened by those who thought it was weak. A commander who oversaw salvage work at Normandy captured the real meaning of what Liberty ships stood for. They were ugly, slow, and simple, but they were there, thousands of them, carrying everything from Sherman tanks to candy bars, from ammunition to blood plasma. They were the bridge between American factories and the fighting fronts. Göring thought Americans could only make consumer goods. He was wrong. We could make anything, including victory. The 2010 Liberty ships stand as memorials to the danger of underestimating democracy based on bias and old ideas. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American industry as limited to consumer goods echoes through history as one of the biggest strategic mistakes ever made. While he held on to fantasies about American weakness, American workers were proving that in the arsenal of democracy, the only limit was imagination, and the only shortage was of enemies foolish enough to test its power. The Liberty ships were not just cargo vessels. They were 10,000-ton proof that freedom, properly organized, could outproduce tyranny by amounts that made military genius unimportant. They showed that wars could be won in factories as surely as on battlefields, and that those who dismiss industrial power for racial myths do so at their own great risk.